Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here. Yes, so I'm going to talk about Doc Brown AI and responsibility gap. Doc Brown admittedly is a little teaser. He doesn't show up very early in the talk, but I'll promise you at some point he will be there and he will be really important. But most of the time I'm going to talk about responsibility gaps. And I'll tell you in a second what those are. Let's see whether this works. Yeah, it does. So we're going to talk about what responsibility gaps are, what they are in AI, whether there are responsibility gaps when it comes to humans. I'm going to introduce you to what I think is a solution to some of the problems with responsibility gaps that have been identified in the literature. Then I suggest that there is still one problem that will remain, and that's difficult to solve, a new problem which we call the vulnerability gap. And then I'll come to Doc Brown. When I say we rather than I, this is because this talk is based on a paper which I've written together with Professor Shannon Waller, who's the director of the Center of Technomoral Futures in Edinburgh. Okay, let's get straight into it. Here is a slide that's supposed to explain what responsibility gaps are. So just imagine the following scenario. There is a car driving down a road, a child runs into the street, and the car runs the child over. That's a terrible disaster, horrible for the child, the family, but obviously also for the driver. And what will happen as soon as the accident has occurred is that the driver of the car will incur lots of obligations that follow from the fact that they created harm. The first question that's going to be on everybody's mind is, are they blameworthy for that action? They might be. They ran over a child and it was their agency. But there might be reasons to think that they are excused or not blameworthy for the action because it might have been foggy. There might have been a car right in front of the child. The child might have jumped out. So that there wasn't anything that the driver could have reasonably done in order to avoid the harm that was created. Nevertheless, even if that were the case, the driver will nevertheless have to do lots of things if they want to take their responsibility seriously. The parents will have many questions. How could this happen? Wasn't there anything that you could have done? They will want to show some sympathy. There might be space for talking to police in order to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. Maybe there was a big car parked in the road that shouldn't be able to park there. So there are things that can be avoided. So this is the ordinary scenario when we are in situations where we have discussions about whether somebody is responsible for a particular event and what the consequences of this are and what ensues if some harm is created. Look at the other side. On the right-hand side, we see something that could be equally tragic. Just imagine the child, rather than being ran over by a car, is hit by a meteorite and dies. It's equally bad for the child. The child is dead. But the situation is very different when it comes to discussions about whether something bad happened or whether there are responsibility questions. It looks like this is just not the right set of circumstances for the responsibility discourse to take hold. It's just tragic. It's just sad. The child is dead, but there is no space here for talking about responsibility. Now, the interesting case, the difficult case, is the one in the middle. A Google car, for example. Suppose the Google car runs over the child and the person in the car has no control over what the car does. So what do we want to say now? Well, in some sense, it isn't that there was a person who can take the roles of responsibility that we would ask of the driver in the first scenario, but it also doesn't feel like, despite the fact that some technology companies would quite like us to believe this, that this is more like the scenario on the right. It's just a tragic accident. And they will say, for example, like, oh, the cars are safer than humans, but sometimes things just go wrong and people die. But there isn't anyone to blame because it's just the machine behaving. And the machine is not an agent that can be responsible for the actions that it performs. And I think they're right insofar as they say that it can't be the machine itself. The machine itself can't be responsible for what it's doing. There will be, maybe in the future, in the far future, there might be, the scenario might change. Maybe at some point in time, AI cars will be responsible in a more interesting sense of moral responsibility for their actions. But I don't think we are there yet. And I'm happy people think that we are closer than I might think. But let's leave that to questions. For now, my assumption is going to be the car itself is not responsible for what it's doing. It's just, in that respect, like a thing, like a meteorite hitting the child. But there is a difference to the meteorite with the Google car, because it's not the universe that made the car move, but it's a corporation or a set of people which are behind the car. The car is, as it were, is part of a socio-technical system, which doesn't just include the car itself, but also the designers, the corporation that builds the car, and the people who sell the car, to a degree also the user who's sitting in the car and might have some responsibilities. So there's a whole, a large group of people who are involved in making the car behave. And somehow that seems intuitively to matter to us, so that we are not happy with the idea that when the car kills the child, it is like a meteorite killing a child. But why? That's the question. So why, why is it, so it doesn't feel like it's a meteorite, but it also doesn't seem to be like the scenario where it's a person, an individual person killing the child. And why, but why not? What causes this responsibility gap? Well, the standard argument that you will find in the literature on responsibility gaps, which is by now fairly large, there are dozens and dozens of articles that have been written on responsibility gaps. The standard argument in the literature is that in philosophy for 2,000 years, there were two conditions that needed to be fulfilled for an agent to be responsible for their action. These conditions are already in Aristotle, in ancient Greece. And what Aristotle says is that you need knowledge about what it is that you're doing. You don't want to do it inadvertently without knowing that it is something that you're doing. So when you switch on the light and it turns out that on the other end somebody is changing the light bulb, but you couldn't see that and you couldn't know it, then you might be killing the person changing the light bulb. But that was not what you were doing. You didn't have the right knowledge. And you also need control. You need to be able to not do the action that creates the harm. And these two conditions, according to philosophical debate on responsibility, are both necessary, and without them being fulfilled, an agent can't be responsible for the outcome of their action. And it looks like it's hard to see how they could be fulfilled in the case of AI, a Google car. Because, well, on the one hand, one of the central features of AI decision-making is that it's opaque. So nobody knows exactly how the AI comes up with its decision. So the knowledge condition is just not fulfilled. No one person knows exactly how the car made the decisions which led to the child dying. And the control condition, again, is not fulfilled by any person in the background of the AI behavior, because an AI is an AI because it's self-learning. It's autonomous. It behaves independently of the people who created it. And the people who create it also don't have full control over what it's going to do, because the AI learns. And insofar, there is no way of fully predicting exactly what it is that the AI is going to do. So because of that, we get, according to the literature, responsibility gaps. The AI is not like a meteorite, but no human fulfills the knowledge and the control condition to enough of an extent that we could say they are responsible for the child being killed. And that's highly unsatisfactory because, well, it leads to a situation where children can get killed. We feel like somebody should be responsible, but it looks like the people who create these cars might be able to walk away and say, "Oh, sorry, not my fault." So, that is the problem with responsibility gaps. What can we do about that? So, the first thought might be the direction that we want to go is already in the literature. Here at the bottom right is Daniel Tiggott, who has suggested the following thing. It's not only AIs where we sometimes don't know why they did things and didn't have full control when nobody had full control over their behavior. Actually, what we've learned from modern psychology and the cognitive sciences is that our knowledge and control of our own mentality is surprisingly shallow. We know a lot less about the behavior, the mechanisms in our own psychology that make us behave. And not only do we not have enough knowledge, but to a degree, we're also lacking control over how these mechanisms produce behavior. So here's just one example, which is mentioned in the quote there. That's implicit biases. And up there, you see the implicit association test invented in Harvard. And so basically, the idea of the implicit association test is that you do a task where you are supposed to match two words. You have a rule according to which you either press a left button or a right button. So one rule can be that if you get white and a harmless word, then you press the left button, and if you get black and a word about that suggests danger or badness, then you press the right button. And then you can do it with the converse rule, white and dangerous and black and good. What turns out, and I've seen this test done live by a colleague of mine in Munich, that people, when they get the right rule that fits their implicit biases, then they all act incredibly fast and all almost at the same time. So in this case, because people are biased, have racial biases against black people, if you have the rule white good, black bad, and then you get an instance of that, you get a clap or a switch or a click of a button that's incredibly fast. If you have the opposite rule, white bad, black good, and then you make people try to follow that rule, it's much slower. And people are very different in the time scale. So you get a trickle of clappings, for example, or button switches. And the suggestion here is, this is not only true for people who are explicit racists, but in fact, people have found this particularly strong in aid workers in the Bronx, who would say, and I think we can believe them openly and consciously, that they very much believe in equality of the races, that there's no suspicion that they are consciously racist. But these implicit biases, nevertheless, seem to influence the behavior of a large amount of them. In fact, in some cases, higher than the average that you get in the average population. So there seems to be a scary disconnect between what makes us behave, at least on short timescales, and what we believe what should make us behave. So our consciously held beliefs don't seem to influence our behavior, at least on short timescales, a lot less than we might normally think. And so suppose this is true, then we might get to a state where, this is Manuel Vargas over there, that there might be a problem for responsibility, not just in AI, but also for humans themselves. it might be the case that for 2,000 years we discussed that we need the knowledge and control condition to be fulfilled. But turns out we actually don't fulfill the control condition and the knowledge condition in the way that we would hope that we should in order for our responsibility practices to be justified. So that's the worry. The worry is psychology tells us that maybe we are, at least according to the old rules that emphasize knowledge and control so much, a lot less responsible than we thought we were. I'll give you one more example. It's the one that I love particularly much. So here's one more idea of why you might think that you know a lot less about your decisions and control them a lot less than you think you do. This is choice blindness, invented in Lund, Sweden. And here they've done this beautiful experiment. So you see two cards like these, two faces, and you are supposed to decide which of the two is more attractive. And then you simply have to give your reasons for why you made the choice that you did. The interesting manipulation in this task is that the guy who works with the experimenter is a magician. So they exchange the cards. So you get the two cards and say, well, this one is more attractive. He takes the two cards back and gives you the card back and says, no, now give me the reasons. Unbeknownst to you, he's giving you the card that you didn't choose. About 70% of people do not notice that they've been given the other card and start giving reasons for making the choice that they didn't make. Now, so it seems incredibly easy to manipulate us about, we seem to have very feeble knowledge about what our choices are, and we seem to have even less contact with the reasons for them, because clearly we are willing to give the reasons for choices that we didn't make. Now you might think, well, this is a really harmless, maybe just with attractiveness. Who knows what it means to be for someone to be more attractive than somebody else? But there's a whole host of these kinds of experiments. The most scary one I find is that you can do this in political cases. So this is before the war, but they had an Israel-Palestine example where they had a scenario of vignettes where there are terrorists in a house somewhere in the West Bank or in the Gaza Strip. And Israel decides that they need to be taken out because they're planning an attack the next day. But there are also innocent civilians in the house. The famous phrase of the collateral damage. So Israel says, well, the next day there might be this big attack. So they drop the bomb. The terrorists die, but also the innocent civilians. And then the question is, well, can Israel justify its behavior or not? And what I found is that, again, with the manipulation, for people, that has to be said, who didn't have strong views on the matter beforehand, you can do exactly the same thing. So you can, somebody who said, no, that's not acceptable, even if there's a risk the next day because of a terrorist attack, you can't just kill people, you can't treat people as means, you can't accept collateral damage. If they've been given then the other card back, the other vignette back, they will start justifying the choice that they didn't make. And it's still about half of the people. Again, they do have to be not terribly invested in political positions, but it works. More scary still, these positions stick. So if you ask them a week later about what they think the right answer to the question is, they will stick with the choice that they didn't make, but that they did justify. So it's incredibly easy to manipulate people in choices that they didn't make, and people just don't notice that this happens. So, and there's a whole host of other experiments in social psychology, in neuroscience of decision making, all of which seem to suggest that knowledge and control in human decision making is a lot less prevalent than we might have pre-theoretically thought. Now, because of that, Tiggott says, well, let's not worry about these AI responsibility gaps, because we hold each other responsible as in humans, and we also have these weird gaps, these weird failings in knowledge and control. But the problem with that move is, I think, that this seems rather naive, because the natural conclusion that one probably would take from this move, when you realize that not only are there responsibility gaps in AI, but that we also don't fulfill the conditions that we need for responsibility in humans, because we don't have the right knowledge and control, would be a position that's also in the literature. It's been defended, for example, by King and Carruthers, where they argue that because we normally think that to be responsible, you need to consciously form your beliefs, and you consciously need to decide. Turns out you don't. Turns out you have no idea and control about why you make the decisions that you do. Well, maybe that means that we shouldn't hold each other responsible. Maybe we need to come up with different ideas, which are just about consequences of decision makings. Sure, we might still have forms of control of people, but we should give up this talk of responsibility, because responsibility seems to imply this idea of choice, of control and knowledge. So that is not the position where I would like to end up at. So is there a way of keeping responsibility alive, but at the same time taking seriously what we've learned from the cognitive sciences? And yes, there is. So Manuel Vargas, who we had before, suggests that there is a failing with traditional accounts of moral responsibility. He argues that they are atomist and monist. I'll explain very quickly what this is, but I won't go into too deep because it's not too important, and we're already quite a little way in because I tend to talk for too long. Atomism is the idea that moral responsibility requires that there's one single trait sitting somewhere in your psychology, and it looks like there isn't. We don't know exactly where this property would be and whether we have it. And monism is that there can be only one property, that our behavior can't be controlled by a collection of different properties that make us behave in the right kind of way. And cognitive science seems to show that both of these conditions are probably not fulfilled. But can we have an account where that's more friendly to the actual psychology that we have? And Vargas believes that we can. So what he suggests is that instead of what we've done traditionally, that we tried to find the right psychological properties that give us the right kind of knowledge and the right kind of control, maybe we should start somewhere else. Because this endeavor of finding the right kind of properties has been pretty elusive over the last hundreds of years, and doesn't seem to match with the psychology that we actually did find over the last 50 years. Instead, what he suggests is to take a hint from Strawson, who suggests that whether or not we have these elusive properties, it just seems to be the case that holding each other responsible is an inevitable practice. It's very deep in our nature to hold each other responsible. If somebody does something bad, we will feel moral emotions about them. We will be indignant, angry. We will demand justification from them. And no amount of metaphysical speculation about whether or not the psychological conditions for responsibility are fulfilled is, according to Strawson, going to change that about us. In practice, when somebody, drops your coffee or hits you on the road, you will feel these emotions and you will hold them responsible for that. So given that we have this practice, let's just try to use that, try to describe the practice and use that in order to come up with a concept of how responsibly practices work. So practice first, as I said already, it's driven by the moral emotions. And thirdly, what Vargas says is go proleptic. Now, proleptic is a big word. Basically, what it means is go forward rather than backward. So, well, normally, in the long tradition of philosophical discourse on responsibility, we were always interested mainly in the blame question, just looking backward at establishing, are you to blame or are you not to blame for dropping my coffee or hitting me in the road? But maybe what we should be saying actually is that we focus on the many other dimensions of moral responsibility that I already mentioned. The saying sorry, answering questions, paying compensation. So when something goes wrong, there's a whole suite of behaviors that are demanded of the agent who's done the wrong, and they are enforced by the moral emotions. And many of them are much easier to make sense of than the blame question. So maybe if we focus our attention there, we can make sense of our responsibility practices much easier than by focusing on blame. Another way of putting the same idea is to say that perhaps we should understand holding each other responsible more as a skill than as a finding out that whether we have a certain particular property. Maybe what responsibility is about is developing something over time by feedback. So again, it's this proleptic idea. We're not looking backwards to establish blame, but when I hold you responsible, what I really want to do there is want to help you to become a better moral agent. And the scaffolding of agency is the key idea in Victoria McGeer's work, who is a fellow traveller with Manuel Vargas. Going to skip the next slide because it's the same idea, and just so that I have a bit of time to explain the vulnerability gap. So, quick conclusion for the first half of the talk. We have a problem with responsibility gaps. Turns out that problem is not only in AI, but also with humans. Our potential solution is to change our idea of what we focus on in responsibility. We can still have responsibility with humans and AI alike if we just think of responsibility slightly differently, not massively. So there is some revisionism in there, but a very large core of what responsibility always was about is intact and can still be used. It's just slight changes which take into account our actual psychology. And beautifully, in this case, for the forward-looking stuff, we are not tied to knowledge and control in the same way that we are for the backward-looking traditional responsibility practices. So that looks like a beautiful way of solving the problem. Just become instrumentalist, and then responsibility gaps for both AI and humans look much easier to be solvable, because we can now say the people behind the AI are responsible, even if they did not quite have the right knowledge and the right control, because even if they didn't have those, they will still benefit from the practice of being held responsible, and it will help them to become better moral agents that will try to avoid creating the same harm again. But one important thing about responsibility practices in humans is that they are a high-stakes game. So if you're not a sociopath, you suffer if you feel the negative effect of moral emotions. So if I'm indignant with you, if I said, well, that wasn't very nice, was it? And why did you do that? That's not a nice place to be in. And obviously there can be bigger consequences. People might start shunning you if you don't react appropriately to moral blame. So if you've done something bad and you say, well, I don't care, I have to go to the cinema this afternoon, so I can't say sorry to the parents, then you'll quickly be out of polite society, and you will have problems creating any social contact. So this is for us high stakes. Our whole existence as we're social creatures, we are really at the mercy of these moral emotions. We need to play the game, in order to lead a healthy and happy life. So in that's what we mean by vulnerability, which is important because some people talk about, in the literature, many people talk about vulnerability that that the victims are being made vulnerable. That's also an important sense of vulnerability, but what we're talking about here mainly is that the agent who does wrong is vulnerable to moral emotions and can't escape engaging with the moral emotions of others because otherwise it will be very harmful for them in a pretty existential way, given that we are social creatures. But obviously, while we are vulnerable to moral emotions, AIs are not. AIs are not because they're machines, and machines don't care about moral emotions or any emotions. They don't understand emotions, they don't have emotions. So the AIs themselves will not be vulnerable to moral emotions. So the AIs themselves can't be part of the moral game. Now, this is not a big problem because we said from the start that AIs can't be moral agents. All this does here is it gives us a reason to understand why AIs probably won't be moral agents for quite a long time. Because the only way that they could become moral agents is by developing understanding and B, being vulnerable to moral emotions. As this is if moral emotions are so critical to our responsibility practices, as I and many others have been arguing, then as long as AIs can't have these emotions and can't understand these emotions, they will not be moral agents. But as I said already, it's not the AIs that we're interested in most of the time. Most people will think, well, we don't want to hold AIs responsible. What would it even mean to hold them AI responsible? You certainly can't put an AI in jail, and they don't care about you being nasty to them. But AIs are parts of larger socio-technical systems. Social-technical systems basically means that there are very many humans in the background that make the AI behave in the way it does. Well, why can't we hold them responsible? And here we argue that the main problem here is what's referred to as the problem of many hands, otherwise known as the problem of buck passing. So the reason why we still get a problem here is because if you have a large corporation, and with AI it's often not just one large corporation, but many, and some individuals that might be independent, it's quite difficult to see who had how much agency in bringing about the behavior of the artificial intelligence. And because of that, when you ask them the question, well, who's responsible here? Who has to answer the questions? Who has to say sorry? Who has to deal with the parents? There will always be the possibility for every single individual to say, well, not me, but maybe this guy. The user will say, I had nothing to do with this. Ask the corporation, and then the corporation, there will be the designers, there will be the executives, there will be the marketing people, there will be the salespeople, and then they will have brought in some external expertise building the machine. Well, and everybody will have a story about why it's not them. And so our moral emotions don't find a natural appropriate target because everybody has this move available to say, it wasn't me, Gov, it was somebody else. And because of this agency disintegration, we lose a handle on how the moral emotions can do the important dirty work that they're doing for us, motivating people to do the right thing, learning from things going wrong. And we think that this is a problem that's much harder to address. One important consequence of this is, if we're right about this, then AI responsibility gaps are far less special than we might have thought. They're not really about AIs particularly, but they are about collective responsibility, a problem with corporate responsibility. Because corporate responsibility, whether there is an AI involved or not, will have this many hands problem. So whether it is Google or whether it's VW or Shell, where there might be no AIs involved, the buck passing, agency disintegration is something that you will get whenever you deal with very large scattered agencies that produce undesirable outcomes. Okay, and here we are, just before we get to the a few short objections. Let's see whether you're with me on this. So suppose we are right, and the problem with AI responsibility gaps is not an AI problem, but is a problem of collective responsibility. Then you should have, then Doc Brown, I'll introduce Doc Brown in a second, should make a difference here. Why? So what is Doc Brown? The idea is Doc Brown is the inventor, creator of the Doc Brown car. But in contrast to the film, the Doc Brown car is now an up-to-date car and also has an AI in it. And Doc Brown has built, designed everything about the car and the AI. But when he sits in the car and lets the car drive, because it's an AI, and it's a proper AI, it learns, he has no control, or exactly the same control that a passenger would have in the Google car. Now, suppose that the Doc Brown car runs over a child. Would we or would we not have the same intuition as with the Google car? And our strong intuition is, and I'm curious to hear whether the intuition is shared or not, is that we wouldn't have the same problem. Why wouldn't we have the same problem? Still true, Doc Brown doesn't fulfill the control and the knowledge condition because it's a proper AI. But because we don't have the agency disintegration, we know exactly who's the right person, who built the thing, who's responsible for making this thing run. It would still be the case that we would talk to Doc Brown and say, Doc Brown, you say sorry. Doc Brown will have the obligation to talk to the parents, etc. Because it's his car, and he is entangled with that car in the right kind of way. And there's nobody else. He is the person responsible. He might not be blameworthy. He might have been negligent in setting up the car. But even if he's not blameworthy, all the responsibility questions justifiably go to him. So if that's right, then the problem with the Google car is not that it's an AI, but the problem is that it's built by a large corporation where you get agency disintegration. Final point here, you can compare Doc Brown, the Doc Brown car, with Doc Brown having a dog. Suppose the dog bites somebody. Again, we wouldn't say that this is, well, it's not the same case as if you stab somebody yourself, but if the dog bites somebody, your dog bites somebody, then it's pretty clear who the parents of the child, the police, etc., will talk to. And you will be under an obligation to justify your behavior. Why was the dog not on a lead? Why did it bite at all? Didn't you see that coming the last couple? So the whole suite of responsibility practices that are associated that we associate with responsibility in the human case will also be there in this indirect case. So if that's right, then Doc Brown is far less problematic, and the real problem with AI is that they are created by corporates, and collective responsibility is so difficult. Right, a few last words. Does this mean it's a problem of corporate responsibility? Yes, to a degree, that is exactly what we're saying. But it's worse because what AI does is that many actions that were done by individual people before, like driving a car, are now done by corporations. And that means that there are many more cases where we get this problem of many hands. And I'll leave the objections because we're going to have the questions, and I won't do this either. I will just show you, finally, this is Shannon, who wrote the paper with me, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.